Chairman of this auspicious occasion, respected colleagues from Parliament, Honorable Kwame Anyimedu Entry, Chair of the Constitutional and Legal Affairs Committee of Parliament, Honorable Amprechum, Ranking Member, Lands and Natural Resources, Honorable John Daku, Counsel to the Caucus, Honorable Amankwa Menu, Deputy Ranking, Defense and Interior, and Honorable Asafo Ejeyi, Deputy Ranking, Foreign Affairs Committee of Parliament. The Executive Director and Directors of IERPP, respected members of the academia here present, our hard-working regional executives, New Patriotic Party, TESCON leaders, and student leaders, my dear students, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and high privilege to stand before you to deliver this lecture on an occasion of such great significance, the inauguration of the Young Commons Forum, Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, and Kumasi Technical University chapter, and the swearing in of its pioneer executives. Today, as we conduct this duty, we are, as the theme of the occasion provides, quote, honoring the foundations, building the future, the Dankwa Dombo Buzia legacy as a blueprint for modern prosperity. At its foundation, a founding declaration was made on the 4th of August, 1947, at Salt Pond. Quote, we, the chiefs and the people, through our delegates assembled in conference at Salt Pond, claim for ourselves and the people of the Gold Coast the rights of liberty, equal rights, free trade, and the inalienable right of all persons to liberty and property governed always under the rule of law. End quote. On such an occasion, this does not go by any mere thought or chance. It is the product of long hours of preparation and genuine commitment to nurturing the next generation of leaders, and for that they deserve our sincere appreciation, those who lay the foundation. Having said that, let me commend the IERPP executives, who are a group of center-right thinkers and who felt that they must put this together to work hand in hand with TESCON so that you, the students, are able to understand the very foundations of our center-right ideology. Today, that chorus grows louder as the touch is passed to the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, as well as Kumasi Technical University chapter, that this great task should find a home at KNUST and KSTU, citadels of science, technology, and engineering excellence, is itself fitting for a tradition built on liberty, enterprise, and the empowerment of the individual has always needed sharp, well-trained minds to carry it into the future. It is to you, the pioneer executives being sworn in today, and to every member of this new chapter that this lecture is addressed. My dear students, every nation that has built lasting prosperity has done so by standing on a foundation laid by those who came before. Ghana is no exception. To understand where this country can go, we must first understand the road by which it has traveled and the men whose convictions paved that road. Today's lecture is an act of historical remembrance and political education. It is also, I will argue, an act of practical relevance, because the ideas that inspired the founders of the United Gold Coast Convention, the United Party, and ultimately the New Patriotic Party are a living inheritance, a set of working principles that have been tested in opposition, tried in government, and are now being offered afresh to the Ghanaian people through the candidacy of Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia. The theme, honoring the foundations, building the future, the Dankwa Dombo Buzia legacy, as a blueprint for modern prosperity, asks us to do two things at once. First, to honor, which means to know accurately, to credit fairly, and to understand deeply the men whose names anchor our tradition. Dr. Joseph Boachi Dankwa, Chief Simon Diodon Dombo, and Professor Kofi Abrifa Buzia. And second, to build, which means to take their inheritance seriously and to apply it to the problems of our own time rather than simply repeating it as a slogan. My dear students, ladies and gentlemen, the theme also asks something further. It insists that this legacy is not just a history to be honored, but a blueprint to be used, that the principles Dankwa, Dombo, and Buzia bequeathed to us, liberty, enterprise, and the welfare of the individual, contain with them the very tools modern Ghana needs to build lasting prosperity. This lecture is organized in 8 movements. I begin at the roots with the United Gold Coast Convention and the birth of organized nationalist politics in the Gold Coast. I trace the same tradition through the United Party into the wilderness years of military and one-party rule before arriving at the founding of the New Patriotic Party in 1992. I then examine in depth the 2 periods in which the tradition has governed Ghana under John Ajekum Kufuor and Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, paying close attention to the social intervention that changed ordinary lives. Finally, I turn to the future, to the vision of Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, as I said before the nation, showing plank by plank how that vision is not a bleak from the Dankwa Dombo Buzia tradition, but its modern expression. Now let me deal with the roots. The United Gold Coast Convention formed 1947. Our tradition began on the 4th of August at Saltpond, where a group of Gold Coast professionals, lawyers, merchants, and the chiefs founded the UGCC. However, my dear students, to understand why the United Gold Coast Convention emerged precisely when it did, we must pause to consider the forces that gave rise to it. In education, the wartime promise of expansion gave way to disappointment when the British government rejected the Elliott Commission's recommendation of a university for the Gold Coast and chose instead to build a single university for British West Africa at Ibadan, a decision that aroused intense disgust and anger in the Gold Coast. Also, the unemployment situation in the Gold Coast grew worse after the Second World War, with the return of home of the ex-servicemen who were given no jobs, as well as the steady increase in the number of elementary school leavers who continued to drift into towns, exacerbated the situation. This provoked a great deal of anger and frustration among the youth and the ex-servicemen of the Gold Coast. Furthermore, the cocoa swollen shoot virus deepened discontent, having spread from the eastern region to most of the colony's cocoa lands. It forced the colonial government to order the felling of both diseased and still-bearing trees, offering compensation that never matched the rising price of cocoa, which provoked open clashes between farmers and the government, cutting out gangs. In commerce, the African traders watched their position erode under the Association of West African Merchants, whose grip on imports and whose practice of conditional sales helped trigger the boycott, the Osu Alata Manche, Ni Kwabna Boni III, organized in 1948 February. Politically, the Burns Constitution of 1946, though praised in London as the first in British West Africa to give Africans a legislative council majority, in practice handed most African seats to chiefs chosen through traditional councils rather than to elected representatives, a structure the intelligentsia at the time, the ex-servicemen, and the youth experienced not as self-government, but as indirect rule revived. These groups turned against the chiefs as well as the colonial authorities. Indeed, the Western Commission went as far as to report that they found, quote, an intense suspicion that the chiefs are being used by the government as an instrument for the delay, if not for the suppression of the political aspiration of the people, end quote. My dear students, members of the academia, ladies and gentlemen, it was against these and many other grievances that exactly 50 years after the formation of the Aborigines Right Protection Society, the UGCC was formed. The UGCC had a clear, audacious aim to press for self-government for the Gold Coast, quotes, in the shortest possible time, according to J.B. Dankwa, an astute lawyer and a scholar, was one of its principal architects. Dankwa brought to this political movement a particular philosophical temperament. Trained in law and philosophy in London, he had already founded a newspaper, the Times of West Africa, served for a decade as Secretary General of the Gold Coast Youth Conference, a forum that incubated the political consciousness of a rising generation. He sat on the colony's Legislative Council from 1946. By the time the UGCC was formed, Dankwa was widely regarded in the words of the Washington Commission that investigated the 1948 Accra riots as, quote, the doyen of Gold Coast politics, end quote. It is important in honoring this foundation honestly to resist two temptations. The first is to flatten the UGCC into mere elite conservatism, a distortion its rivals found convenient. The second is to romanticize it as a finished ideology. What the UGCC actually represented was a political tradition of how a nation earns its freedom through constitutional means, through the rule of law, through the patient building of institutions, and through an unflinching insistence on the dignity and capability of the African to govern himself. Dankwa's vision, therefore, was never freedom for its own sake. It was freedom as a necessary condition for what he would later call a property-owning democracy, a Ghana in which Ghanaian government first duty was to liberate the energies of the people so that they might build, own, and prosper by their own enterprise. It was Dankwa and the UGCC leadership who in 1947 invited Kwame Nkrumah, who was in London, to return home and serve as the party's general secretary. The invitation would prove momentous and also the source of the first great fracture in Gold Coast nationalist politics. Nkrumah's impatience with the UGCC's gradualism and his preference for a more radical mass mobilization approach led him to break away in 1949 and form the Convention People's Party. From that moment, two competing visions of how Ghana should be built, and by extension, two political traditions began to take shape. One held that the state should be the primary engine of development and the chief allocator of opportunity. The other, the tradition we are tracing today, held that the state's task was to secure liberty, property, and the rule of law, and then set back to let the energies of free citizens do the building. Now let me take you from the United Gold Coast Convention to United Party, the coalition of 1957. My dear students, the decade that followed independence in 1957 tested the Dankwa Dombo Busia tradition severely. The CPP, now in government under Nkrumah, moved to consolidate power. In 1957, the Avoidance of Discrimination Act, 1957, number 38, banned political party organizations along regional, ethnic, or religious lines, a measure that, whatever its stated justification, had a practical effect of forcing fragmented opposition to either merge or disappear. Several parties answered that pressure by coming together. The Northern People's Party, formed in April 1954 under Chief S.D. Dombo to protect the interests of the Northern Territories, brought with it its roster of founding figures, among them Alhaji Mumuni Baumia, to whom we will return later in this lecture. The National Liberation Movement, founded in Kumasi in September 1954 by the Asante-Hene's senior linguist, Bafo Osei Akoto, in protest at the CPP's cocoa pricing policy, was joined the same year by Professor Kofi Abrifa-Busia, whose own Ghana Congress Party had performed poorly at the polls. To these were added the Unlock Youth Organization, the Muslim Association Party, the Togoland Congress, and the Ga Shifimokwe. Out of this coalition, the United Party was founded in October 1957 and formally inaugurated on the 3rd of November 1957 at a public rally at Bukom Square in Accra, where Professor Busia presided. My dear students, here we must pause on a moment of political character that this tradition has always considered foundational. At the time of the measure, Chief S.D. Dombo, who was the leader of the Northern People's Party, held more parliamentary seats than any other opponent of the new coalition, and Dombo himself was serving as leader of the opposition. By the ordinary arithmetic of politics, the leadership of the new United Party might have fallen to him. Instead, recognizing that the larger national projects, the dislodging of an increasing dominant single party, required unity above personal ambition, Dombo stood aside, surrendered his position as leader of the opposition and accepted the deputy leadership under Professor Kofi Abrefa-Busia. It is this act, this subordination of self to cause, that earns Dombo his permanent place in our tradition's name and memory. Within this tradition, therefore, I dare say that Dombo remains the standard bearer of a simple but profound principle, that the cause must always outweigh any man. I repeat, that the cause must always outweigh any man. Busia, who assumed the leadership, brought his own formidable intellectual contribution. A sociologist and academic of international standard, Busia articulated a vision of what he called a democratic welfare society anchored in the dignity of the individual and what he termed freedom with responsibility. He insisted against the prevailing winds of state-led socialism that there can be no meaningful democracy if the vast majority of the people live in poverty, but equally that poverty could not be abolished by concentrating power and property in the hands of the state. His vision of empowerment rather than dependency, of citizens equipped to build rather than citizens administered to. It is worth pausing here on this occasion that brings together young people from every region, every ethnic background, and every faith under one forum to recall precisely how Busia understood the demands of genuine democracy. Writing in exile in 1967, in his book titled Africa in Search of Democracy, he set down a test that this gathering itself satisfies. Quote, democracy cannot work unless those who seek to exercise these civil liberties also recognize the equal rights of others to exercise them too. They must recognize the rights of others to think differently and to choose differently, end quote. These veritable words, written by a man in exile from his own country, from daring to oppose a one-party drift, is as relevant to this forum in 2026 as it was to the Ghana of 1967. A forum such as this one, can only be a genuine commons if it is built on exactly the principle, the right of every member to think and choose differently while still belonging fully to the same house. Therefore, my dear students, it is from Dankwa's UGCC philosophy, from the unifying spirit of 1957 merger, from Dombo's selfless and unifying leadership, and from Busia's democratic warfare thought that this tradition takes its full name, the Dankwa Dombo Busia tradition. Members of the academia, respected colleagues from Parliament, students, ladies and gentlemen, let me run you through years of detention, coup d'etats, and the long road back to democracy. Before we follow the tradition into 8 years of electoral struggle, we must pause on a debt that is too easily left unpaid in the retelling of this history. As the Convention People's Party tightened its grips through the Preventive Detention Act of 1964, Act 240, Dankwa himself was twice its casualty. He was first detained in October 1961 and released the following June. He was arrested the second time, 8 January 1964, this time without any charge ever made known to him. From his cell in Nsawam prison, denied access to his own books and papers, he wrote letter after letter to Nkrumah, in one pleading simply that he was tired of being in prison with no opportunity to make contribution to the progress and development of the country. No order for his release ever came. After 13 months in detention without trial, 4th February 1965, Dr. Joseph Boachi Danka suffered a fatal heart attack in his condemned cells and passed on to eternity. The man who has stood as sword point in 1947 to claim liberty, equal rights, and the rule of law for his countrymen did not live to see multi-party democracy restored to the nation he had given his life to found. It is right that on an occasion celebrating the young and the future, I say plainly that the foundations we now know today were not laid cheaply. The United Party carried this philosophy into opposition against CPP through the most difficult years of one-party encroachment, including the period of Nkrumah's presidency for life and the eventual one-party state declared in 1964. When the military overthrew Nkrumah on 24 February 1966 and a return to constitutional rule followed, the tradition re-emerged in 1969 at the Progress Party, again under Buzia's leadership, with Edward Akufo-Addo serving as the country's ceremonial president. The Progress Party won the 1969 election decisively, the clearest electoral vindication the tradition received. But its tenure was cut short by another military coup in 1972, a reminder of how fragile constitutional governance remained in this period. The years that followed were lean ones for the tradition, as they were for multi-party democracy itself in Ghana. When civilian rule briefly returned at the end of 1970s, the tradition adherents organized as the Popular Front Party, led by Victor Owusu, and the United National Convention under Pawuli Oforiatta. Both parties drew their membership overwhelmingly from the old United Party network. Ghana's return to military rule in 1981 under Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings again interrupted the constitutional politics, but it did not extinguish the tradition. Our tradition survived, and in 1992, we gave birth to the new Patriotic Party. Before the party was birthed, it began as a Dankwa Buzia fan club. Many of those who had joined the tradition earlier led this foundation. Names like B.J. Darocha, Professor Edu Buahin, John Ajekum Kufuor, Nana Adodankwa Akufo-Addo, and many other prominent minds came together, and eventually on 28 July 1992, they revived the tradition with the blessing of prominent men like Victor Owusu under the new name we celebrate today. Now let me take you through the core tenets of the Dankwa Dombo Buzia center-right ideology. In the submissions that would follow, I will take you through what we mean when we say we are center-right. The Dankwa Dombo Buzia tradition is underpinned by a coherent set of ideological principles that have remained remarkably consistent despite changes in political contexts, party labels, and constitutional regimes. These core tenets include the following: liberal democracy and constitutionalism. At the heart of our tradition is a firm commitment to liberal democratic governance anchored in constitutional rule, separation of powers, and the protection of fundamental human rights. From Dankwa's early advocacy for constitutional government under colonial rule to Buzia's emphasis on parliamentary democracy in the Second Republic, the tradition has consistently rejected authoritarianism and arbitrary rule. Our philosophy also celebrates the rule of law, human rights, and individual liberties. Following this is democratic governance, decentralization, and pluralism. We are also known as the champions of free market economy and capitalism. Economically, this tradition favors a private sector-led development, market-oriented policies, whilst recognizing a regulatory role of the state. It rejects state-dominated economic models in favor of an enabling environment in which individual initiative, entrepreneurship, and competition can thrive. We also believe in property ownership, that in a democracy, individuals must be allowed to own property, to be at liberty to celebrate their own successes. We also believe that there must always be social responsibility and limited welfare provision, mindful of the need to take care of the vulnerable in society. So while emphasizing individual responsibility, the tradition does not advocate an unrestrained laissez-faire system. Rather, it recognizes the obligation of the state to provide basic social services and social protection for vulnerable groups, thereby balancing market efficiency with social cohesion. The MPP party elected the distinguished historian Professor Albert Edubwayin as its first presidential candidate, who contested the 1992 election against Jerry Rawlings and lost in a contest whose fairness was itself contested. Edubwayin's courage in that period, his willingness to challenge and entrench incumbency through legitimate democratic means, restored a measure of national faith in the possibility of genuine opposition politics. He is known to have broken the culture of silence through his courage, through his energies in public advocacy against the one-party system under Rawlings' regime in military dictatorship. The party tried again in 1996 under John Agyekum Kufuor, narrowing the gap but still falling short against the formidable incumbency of the NDC. In the year 2000, John Agyekum Kufuor defeated Professor John Evans Atta Mills in an election that marked for the first time since 1969 a return to power for the Dankwa Dombo Buzia tradition through fully competitive democratic means. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now take you through the periods where our tradition had the opportunity to govern under this new dispensation, the Fourth Republican Constitution, the 1992 Constitution we have today. So our tradition in government and in motion. Kufuor spent 8 years in office, the first sustained opportunity in the era of competitive multi-party democracy to translate our philosophy into the daily lives of the Ghanaian people. What is striking, looking back, is how directly his flagship policies express the tradition's oldest conviction, that the state exists to remove the barriers that prevent ordinary citizens from building a dignified life for themselves and their families. I begin the health sector. Before Kufuor came into office, we had what we call cash and carry. The NDC says they are social democrats. They trace their roots from socialism. So, under normal circumstances, social democrats should have put in place mechanisms for the vulnerable. But under the NDC, we had what we call cash and carry. It was J.A. Kufuor who introduced the National Health Insurance Policy in 2003. The health insurance introduced by the Kufuor government was a representation of a paradigm shift in Ghana's social policy architecture by replacing the exclusionary cash and carry system with a pooled insurance model. The state reduced the economic barriers to healthcare access for millions of Ghanaians. And by way of education, in Parliament back in the days, the NDC said, even in the United States, mighty America did not have health insurance. Therefore, the health insurance policy will fail. But today, they are the ones who are enjoying it. It is my contention, therefore, that from a center-right ideological perspective, the NHIS was not an act of welfare populism, but an investment in productive capacity. Access to healthcare strengthens human capital. Health is a prerequisite for self-actualization, labor participation, and entrepreneurial activity. By safeguarding individuals from catastrophic health expenditure, the NHIS enhanced economic security, reduced vulnerability, induced poverty, and enabled citizens to engage more fully in economic life. A healthy population is better positioned to work, innovate, and accumulate assets, the core features of property-owning democracy. In this sense, the scheme operationalized a center-right philosophy that social protection should empower the individuals to function effectively within the market, not to withdraw from it. Now, capitation grants, free compulsory universal basic education, and school feeding. Ladies and gentlemen, I again submit that it was Kufuor's administration that for the first time in the history of our country, under the Fourth Republic, declared and made basic education free from kindergarten to JHS3. My dear students, it was Kufuor who introduced the school feeding policy, which incentivized enrollment and retention, particularly in low-income and rural communities, by providing one hot meal, one nutritious meal daily to pupils in public kindergartens and primary schools. Together, the effective implementation of free compulsory basic education, these interventions reinforce the ideological commitment to individual empowerment through education. Again, this reflects center-right logic in its most constructive sense. By keeping children in school, improving nutrition, and reducing the cost burden on households, these programs lifted children from disadvantaged background into human capital pipeline necessary for full participation in economic and civic life. Then, Kufuor again, recognizing the need for the state to invest in public transport, introduced the Metro Mass Transit system and revamped the public transport system. We all call it Kufuor bus. Is there Atamil bus? No. Do we have Rollins bus? No. Do we have Mahama bus? No. What bus do we know? And when they introduced the Akonfirm policy, what happened? The odd and confirms flew to where? So I contend, therefore, that the NDC has no single social intervention program introduced by them and implemented successfully since they first ever had a chance to govern this country. They have none. Still on Kufuor, the cocoa sector. It was Kufuor who introduced the mass spraying policy and invested in agriculture, supported our farmers, and for the first time in the history of our country, cocoa harvest and cocoa production increased to 1 million tons. President Kufuor also declared a golden age of business and a private sector-led growth that saw many youths taking to business, investing their energies in private sector and creating jobs. I am standing here as a living example of that initiative. And I must cite this example to you. When I was at UCC, level 300, I was doing BCom. At the time, Kufuor has sent some people to various universities to prepare us on private sector initiatives, entrepreneurship. So there were regular career counseling, and many of us went on to listen to them. It was that counseling session that took me out of school. And I left school to register my business, started running business. My first loan was granted by NIB to go and buy trucks, first motorbikes for my courier company. That was Kufuor in action. Many businesses benefited because it is the private sector that creates the opportunity, not public sector bureaucracy. Kufuor also undertook social security and pension reforms that benefited the aged and the elderly. Now let me also take you through our tradition under a renewed mandate, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, and the second coming of MPP, 2017 to 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, as I've already submitted, Kufuor's presidency established that this tradition could govern competently and compassionately. The presidency of Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo carried the inheritance forward by a tie of blood as well as conviction. Akufo-Addo's own father, Edward Akufo-Addo, a member of the UGCC, who later served as Chief Justice and later the country's ceremonial president from 1970 to 1972 under Professor Buzia's premiership. And as he was, by his own family's account, the great-grandnephew of Dr. J.B. Dankwa, by the time he reached the presidency, Akufo-Addo was not only a custodian of this tradition's ideas, he carried its history in his own household. His presidency sought to extend that inheritance further still into secondary education, industrial transformation, and structural diversification of the Ghanaian economy. The famous, the unmatched, the second to none free SHS. Members of the academia, regional executives, my dear students, ladies and gentlemen, the free SHS policy stands as the most emblematic social intervention of the Akufo-Addo's administration, and arguably the most consequential of Ghana's fourth republic. By removing financial barriers at the secondary level, the policy expanded access to education for thousands of students from low-income households who would otherwise have been excluded from secondary education. In doing so, it did not only increase enrollment figures, it widened the pipeline of opportunity. This intervention transformed education from a privilege of birth into a function of talent and effort, thereby democratizing access to what he had been an elite knowledge economy. Education within the Dankwa Dombo Busia center-right conception of a property-owning democracy is the primary instrument through which individuals develop their talent, enhance their productivity, and acquire the capacity to participate meaningfully in economic life. Free SHS, therefore, represent not a departure from our center-right philosophy, but its practical fulfillment, empowering individuals with the human capital necessary to become economically self-reliant. In center-right terms, free SHS is best understood not as consumption spending, but as human capital formation on a national scale with long-term returns in productivity, innovation, and social cohesion. Respected colleagues from Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, complementing the free SHS, the Akufo-Addo administration also extended the policy to cover technical and vocational education and training, TVET, making it accessible without tuition barriers to junior high school graduates and other youth seeking practical skills. This expansion reflects a center-right developmental philosophy that values skills empowerment and productive inclusion, recognizing that formal education alone is insufficient to prepare individuals for competitive participation in a modern economy. By integrating TVET into the broader free SHS framework, the policy aimed to cultivate a workforce equipped with industry-relevant skills, enhance employability, and to stimulate enterprise creation. The socio-economic impact of this extension has been significant. It has broadened access to technical training for students from financially constrained backgrounds, strengthened institutional capacity in vocational schools, and improved alignment between educational outcomes and labor market demands. In doing so, the policy contributes to reduce youth unemployment, enhance human capital, and greater economic resilience. Akufo-Addo did not only end there, he also introduced the STEM educational policy. Science, technology, education, and mathematics was key as part of educational policy reforms. He set it up with the infrastructure, and today our friends are benefiting from it. Let me take you to the 1D1F, a policy that was initiated to allow for free enterprise to thrive. My dear students, many companies are burdened by the taxes they pay. What Akufo-Addo Bawumia administration did was to take away the taxes. So when you come into our country and you want to invest, the equipment, the raw materials you import in, you don't pay duty. Our friends criticize it. They came, they said they've cancelled the 1D1F. But ask them a simple question. What have they introduced in place of the 1D1F? They promised 1 job, 3 shifts. They promised 24-hour economy. All have become a complete scam. 419 government. The Akufo-Addo administration also introduced the planting for food and jobs that made locally produced rice, maize, yam, and other farm produce cheaper than being imported. Today, it is expensive to locally produce maize as compared to imported maize. Today, it is expensive to buy locally produced rice as compared to imported rice. Did we go or did we come? The very thing they criticized as they came into office, they are unable to introduce any policy to bring a change where Ghanaians will say there's a vast difference between the old and the new. There is none. They criticized Galamsey. They said we did not have a strong anti-Galamsey policy. But today, they have set up the gold board. They have set up the gold board to buy Galamsey gold. Again, a government which is a walking contradiction. Now let me turn to the Agenda 111. Akufo-Addo administration, recognizing the need to ensure massive health infrastructure, began the Agenda 111. They came in, they've abandoned it. Recently, the chief of Doma Hinkro reminded them that it is important for them to complete the Agenda 111 hospitals than to say they are constructing 24-hour market, because market already exists in our communities. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude this lecture by turning to the future of our party and its tradition. Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia. He is the next chapter of this tradition. I repeat, whether you like it or not, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia is the next chapter of this tradition. My dear students, every tradition that survives across generations must answer the same question each time leadership passes to a new hand. Does this successor carry the inheritance forward or only invoke its name? The case I wish to make in this final movement, in conclusion, is that Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, as the current leader and presidential candidate of the New Patriotic Party, has done the harder thing. He has taken the abiding principles of the Dankwa Dombo Buzia tradition and translated them into a program suited to the specific economic and technological moment Ghana now faces. A moment defined by fiscal pressure, a youthful population in urgent need of jobs, and a fourth industrial revolution that will reward nations who prepare for it and punish those who do not. I promised earlier in this lecture that I will return to the name mentioned only in passing when we discuss the founding of the Northern People's Party in 1954, Alhaji Mahamudu Mumuni Bawumia. This man sat among the founding figures of that party alongside Chief Dombo himself and went to serve as its vice chairman. He is Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia's own biological father. Therefore, Dr. Bawumia, who holds our flag today, is not new to this tradition. This is not a detail offered for sentimental alone. It means that the man now asking to lead this tradition into government is not merely an admirer of Dombo's example of selfless unity from distance of 70 years. He was raised in a household that carried that founding moment as a living memory. The chain we have traced this afternoon, from Sword Pond to the Northern Territories Council, to Bukom Square, to the swearing-in taking place in this hall today, runs through his own name as much as through the party. Dr. Bawumia himself has framed his candidacy as an inclusive national project. In his own words at UPSA, this is what he had to say, quote, "My vision is to create a tent big enough to accommodate all our people, to tap into the resourcefulness and the talent of our people, irrespective of our different ethnic, political, and religious backgrounds. To channel our energies into building the kind of country that assures a food self-sufficient, safe, prosperous, and dignified future for all Ghanaians, to create sustainable jobs with meaningful pay for all, and for Ghana to participate fully in the fourth industrial revolution using systems and data," end quote. Two ideas hold this vision together. The first is the big tent, a Ghana that draws on the talent of every citizen without regard to ethnicity, faith, or party. Ladies and gentlemen, let me pause here to do some further explanation. Oftentimes, some critics, our adversaries, the propagandists, will tell you that MPP belong to a particular group of Ghanaians. I tell you that it is complete falsehood. Dr. Bawumia himself is not from any Akan tribe. Is not from a big tribe. He's a Mamprisi man. He's a Muslim. But the party did not say that because he's a Muslim and a Mamprisi, he doesn't deserve that honor. The party says that because of his hard work, because of his loyalty, he should lead the party. So if you are a student, and somebody wants to take you away from MPP by telling you that MPP belongs to some group of people, belongs to a particular ethnic group, tell that person that our party, the MPP, is a party of diversity and inclusiveness. That our party is a party for all tribes, all ethnic groups, all religions in Ghana. And by the way, I stand before you delivering this lecture for and on behalf of Dr. Bawumia, for and on behalf of the tradition I cherish so much. My dad is an Anlo man. I am from Volta region. My mom is an Efutu woman from Winneba. In any event, in Parliament today, Central region, we only have 4 seats. Ashanti region has overwhelming seats in Parliament on our ticket. Why did they choose me as a leader? It means that the party cherishes diversity. The party does not. The party does not say, because you belong to Volta region, because you belong to a small community in Efutu, Winneba, we want a majoritarian group to lead the party. Our tradition offers equal opportunity. So my dear student, the right place to be, the place to be is the New Patriotic Party. Let no one deceive you. This party would give you the opportunity. Work hard. No matter your tribe, go back to your community. Change the minds of your people. Tell them that the party that has so far put in place social intervention policies to transform Ghana is the MPP. And by the way, the NDC in Parliament, they are 189, together with the independent candidates. But if it comes to, when it comes to debates on national issues, they cannot mark the length of the trousers of the mighty minority. They cannot. They can have their 189. We don't care about the votes. We care about substance. And it's the substance that makes you relevant in national politics. So you, the student, must be proud of this party, this tradition. Associate yourself with the vision of Dr. Bawumia. When he talks about digitalization, he's not just making a rhetoric statement. He knows what he's saying. In today's world, it is digitalization that embodies every economy. A leader must understand the digitalized revolution to be able to lead. And trust me, NDC is going back into opposition, whether they like it or not. Oh yeah, Bawumia baba. Oh yeah, Bawumia baba. Of all I've said, there's one thing I want you to leave this conference room with. Unity, unity, unity. What did I say? Unity, unity, unity. One more time. Unity, unity, unity. Let me attempt a little tree. Mamika tree kaka. Mesramu yenu anu NDC fo no omode ndada ne entro no omode gi aban to me ensem bebre no omo kan e na enam se ya MPP fo yenya abotre ama ye hunti yenya odo ama ye hunti omutumi agi tumi no efriyensa wo hwe Ghana bokosamo ende maka no brofo akase yi a eye MPP amanye kuo no ena etumi edi nhihye papa ba ende obia di ho adanse ende Ghana amembuo ho nhihye bi ekoso wo bo baako ebisa ni na ye MPP na de bae. It's out there and just say MPP co-opposition. Because enkabom mesremo youth amuwa ha mu amuwo suopon mu wie school na se dwumani wa wo de abrebo ne kwano nam he. It is ungrofo way my endi omachi yenkambom ye wo leader baako pe ye leader baako pe Kugurudu Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia onu echi obi eni obio na mesremu moma unity no enye adwuma Cape Coast University Tesco omo aye ade kese bia me bom abaso me kotu omofo e ka kyerɛ mo sɛ ɔmo nka mbom na ɔmo ngyina ɛmma party ne anyonyam. Last week meeting some bi say your Tescon former president no ɔno no we winning SRC president ɛwɔ UCC. So what it means in say students no yɛka yɛn ho bɔ mu a we will take over and ensure say your ideology no gyina wɔ campuses. Ɛno nda nkyɛn mesrɛ sometimes media makosua social media ho adeɛ kakra nti dia ya kyerɛ me wo school no me bɛka bibi kakra kyerɛ mo. Professor bi ɔbɛkyerɛ ma adeɛ no ɔse ebia na obi ekodidi watem ɛwɔ social media wo check here ebia just 2 likes ebia 0 share obi ampon share nkrofo mienu pe na wa yeden I like it na wubuefu na woso wo di ekire wo mbom na wo yeden wo spread it. And sometimes obi ka asemboni bi fa party ho anafa wo nua bi ho a ma ni dwem nko ebia na obi ampon ho ye na yen focus on Dr. Bawumia na yen fa nkunimdie ma no. And no maybe who are man of oxygen. Because training now to no be anywhere to me stopping. Mrs. saying, Obi anywhere obey to me stop training. Ain't you know, Madam Munasi. And then Menda. And come on, be papa be. But and nam some dot party no. And nam some person would tie your tradition no. Na bokosem ne dia etina emma munti. What's that? Look, up, down, full. We are in opposition. The future is bright. Thank you very much. God bless you. God bless the New Patriotic Party.